And now, our community insight with Bill Novelli. Bill is the founder of Georgetown University's Business for Impact and distinguished professor of the practice at Georgetown's McDonough School of Business. Bill is the author of the new book, Good Business: The Talk, Fight, Win Way to Change the World. Please welcome Paula Berezin and Bill Novelli.
Hello there. And I'm so happy I'm here joined with Bill Novelli, who is someone I've known for years. And I want to say to you, Bill, I loved your book and I thought I knew you well, but reading through this book, I could not believe the stories and the inside track on what you've done for social impact over the years. And so to set the stage, I would like to start with this brief video for everybody in the social capital community. To explain myself here, I want to start on page 165. And Bill, that is actually when I first met you. And I was a consultant to ARP for quite a long time. And I actually worked with the previous CEO, who was a man by the name of Horace Dietz, who happened to be, by way of information, a priest. And I remember coming out of your office, Bill, when I first met you, and I thought two things. I thought, he's not like the other CEO. And I also remember thinking, these people better fasten their seatbelts. And I want to flash to on your ARP chapter, you talk about an all-staff meeting where, after an incredible legislative win of a lifetime, you actually quoted the great philosopher and songwriter, Kermit the Frog. And it occurred to me as I was reading the book and preparing for this, that song really is such a thread for who you are and actually the book. And just the idea that you always followed your North Star. You were at the pragmatic center of everything always. People from every walk of life and from every side of the aisle always said that you weren't beholden to anybody and you always followed the truth. And I think that message in that song is so relevant for the social capital community because it is hard to be green. It's lonely sometimes. And I think you are such an inspiration in terms of how you've approached things. And I think it's such a lesson learned and an inspiration for this community. So my first question to you is, can you talk about that talk, fight, win of a lifetime, and whether it's battling over the future of social security or getting prescription drugs into Medicare? Can you just talk about, with this community, the lessons learned?
Oh, Paula, it's so kind of you to say all those good things. And I love that you love the book.
I love the book.
So yes, it is lonely being green. You're absolutely right. And, taking a strong stand on a policy issue or a social issue can be difficult, especially when you incur the wrath of a whole political party or a whole community. But sometimes that's what we have to do. And when it comes to that prescription drugs and Medicare issue, the opportunity came for us, for AARP, to get prescription drugs into Medicare. And you cannot practice modern medicine without prescription drugs. So we fought really hard. The Democrats hated the idea. They did not want George Bush to have a Medicare win. And we put it over the top. And then not long after that, President Bush declared that he was going to partially privatize Social Security. And we fought hard against that. And we defeated it. And the Republicans hated it. And so from that, I really learned two important lessons. And I must tell you that in both cases, I received hate Christmas cards. And I still have them. So the two lessons are, number one, really, you need to understand what your constituents want and what they need and what they value. And you have to do your very best to inform them and educate them. But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. And I think you have to make a decision that benefits them and benefits the country, and have the courage of your convictions and be accountable. And the second thing is, you referred to it earlier, I think we need to try hard to be at the pragmatic center. Yes, we have to be political, but not partisan. And there's an old saying that the only thing in the middle of the political road are yellow lines and dead armadillos. And that's very cute, but I don't think it's true. I think it's the broad center of this country where most voters are, not on the extremes. And so my lesson is, Nancy Pelosi called me the worst thing she could think of. She called me a Republican. And Mitch McConnell called me a Democrat. And one senator called me a communist. But I had a plaque on my wall when I would go to work every day. And it had two quotes. One was from a very conservative senator. And he said, AARP is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party. And the other quote was a liberal congressman from California. And he said, what does AARP stand for? Always advocating for the Republican Party. And I said, yes, we call them as we see them. See the problem, get the evidence, fix the problem. And I think that's an important lesson for us all.
I love that. And I think fixing the problem leads to my next question, but I just want to comment for all the folks in the room. And as you, just a reminder to put your questions in the chat. I think one of the things that we're really struggling with right now is that most people in this room right now have audiences that are very divided and have very different views. And people are really trying to navigate how to bring people together. But this idea that there's going to be some kind of kumbaya is not even on the table anymore. And I think that, and it's not just at the top, it's leading every single, in every single layer of the organization. So I think this is something that we could use a lot of Bill Novelli therapy for. But so, fixing problems and sort of dealing with these crises, I love the way you shared the challenges throughout the book. And I think one of your gifts is how humble you are. And also, like, every step of the way, you would always talk about lessons learned and what you could do better. In the care chapter, it was really interesting. You had talked about how turnaround stories. And I thought to myself, oh my God, we're all living in turnaround stories. And in the example of care, you gave you talked about the mess that you inherited and how you dealt with it. And then you really sort of spoke to, you have to approach these things. It's not that the crisis that happens, it's how you deal with them. And I would really love for you to share your insights on the turnaround stories like care and the lessons learned with that.
Well, I think turnaround stories are a really good tactic. And crisis management is a real test of leadership. And there's all kinds of unhelpful advice out there. Get out in front of the crisis, apologize early, all these different things. And I learned some valuable lessons from turnaround or from crisis management. First of all, and this is so obvious, you need to stop the bleeding. So in the care example, $1 million worth of cooking oil was stolen from a warehouse in Mozambique. And it wasn't Care USA's oil, it was Care Australia's oil. So we had three governments angry at us. We had the US government, the Mozambique government, and Care Australia's government all mad at us. And we had to figure out what to do about this. And the first thing is pretty obvious, which is stop the bleeding. Figure out what happened if you can, and keep it from getting worse. But the second thing is honest communications. And the one thing we have to learn in this world we live in is don't lie, don't make it up. They're going to figure it out anyway. But the third thing, Paula, is the idea of turnaround stories. And what I mean by that is come up with an authentic, real reason why this is never going to happen again. So in the case of the cooking oil, Trish Shannon, who's now at AARP's foundation, was with me at CARE. And she and I worked on this together. And we came up with tighter controls, with legal contracts, with improved security. We said, this is why this is never going to happen again. And then years later, I went on the board of a professional society in the US. And the day I went on the board, they called me and they said, we have a little problem. $5 million have been embezzled from our society. Do you have any ideas on how to fix this? And I said, do you have an internal audit unit at the society? And they said, no. I said, well, put one in place and then say, this is never going to happen again. So that's an example of a turnaround strategy.
I love it. And I think for most people, they know you, they know of you, but I was always so impressed that you were the Novelli in Porter Novelli, which is a great agency that you founded. And I just think your crisis management, both for crises that are good opportunities and challenges to overcome, I think is just so many lessons learned there. And I also feel like one of the things we talked about at our conference is this idea that a crisis doesn't create leaders, it reveals them. And I just feel like all of the challenges that you've had throughout the years and how you've been so upfront about them, that's the book is really shows a lot of wins, but it also has the fight and all the battles. And I think that people really appreciate the candidness. So thank you for that. And then my third question really goes to this idea of we're all on board with the idea of coalitions and that we can't get anything done alone. But I look at your background and I'm thinking, I don't know anybody that has had the coalition experiences inside organizations and with other organizations. And when I read the tobacco wars, when I read through your chapter on the tobacco wars and what that was like and how you aligned with so many organizations and even had not just challenges externally with who you were battling with, but internally with your coalition and how you dealt with that. I just thought that there was so much relevance there. And on page 73, you say, the competition for money in leadership is common in every issue I've ever worked on. Some of it is the struggle for scarce resources. Hello, we all know this, but part of it stems from the conviction and passion people bring to fighting for important causes. And part of it may be me from where I'm sitting, but I want to say that you had talked about you could have maybe done a better job. And I have to say, I think this is one of your superpowers. And your account of the coalition inside, when you were the founder and head of Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, you worked with American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, Lung, and all kinds of other organizations. It was captivating to me. And your account also on the coalition to transform and advance care, which I think is such an important issue, CTAC, that you cover in chapter 6. You talk about how coalitions are hard to build, maintain, to make cohesive, and use as funding sources. But nobody that I know has not only been able to dissect the problem, but actually have lots of solutions and a track record behind them. So we're all dealing with these intractable problems. We know we can't go it alone, but can you give counsel going forward on how we build these coalitions and what kind of leadership skills are required for us?
Paula, I could write another book.
Please do.
About all the mistakes that I've made.
Okay.
And I've made a lot of mistakes. And coalition building is really, really hard to do. I was at a conference one time of people working in tobacco control. And this woman stood up and she said, I know how we can defeat the tobacco industry. Let's make them work in coalitions. So coalitions are hard work and they're difficult to do. But the social issues and the environmental issues that we face today are way, way too hard for endless combat. We need to get everybody at the table. And I'm talking about business, civil society, and government. And I'm tired of hearing that government is the problem. Government is not the problem. And Bill Gates famously said that the public sector's investments unlock the private sector's ingenuity. So we need everybody at the table, and we're not going to always agree. So that's where the talking and fighting comes in, and that's how we're going to win. And oftentimes, the people at the table are strange bedfellows. They're not agreeing with each other. And so an example today is at Georgetown, we run something called the Portion Balance Coalition. This is about fighting overweight and obesity. So we have food companies, beverage companies, academics, government, nonprofits, all at the table. And I can tell you that they don't agree. But we're negotiating. And we have to negotiate, we have to talk and fight if we're going to win. And back in the tobacco days, we negotiated with the tobacco industry. I can't tell you how unpopular that was. But today we're negotiating with the Taliban. If we can negotiate with the Taliban, we can negotiate with the tobacco industry. And today's opponents could be next week's allies. So there's no permanent opponents, no permanent enemies. There's only permanent values and principles. And leadership is critical. And the way I like to think about it, Paula, is if you're going to do this kind of coalition work, you've got to be opportunistic. You know, find and make a way. We need to be aggressive. Sitting on our hands is not going to get it done. And grassroots really matters, which is why so many people tuning in today can make a real difference. Grassroots really matters. And the last thing is what I call the Ronald Reagan principle. So Reagan supposedly said, give me 60% of what I want, and I'll come back and get the rest later. The idea is that you can't have winners take all. You know, everybody has to win a little bit if we're going to make coalitions work.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about there's no perfect bill. And, you know, you just have to think about the battles, but win the war. And I do think while there's a lot of legislative examples, there's a lot of partnership examples in here too. And the principles are so relevant to everybody in terms of trying to navigate not just inside coalitions within their own organization, but with other strategic partners.
Absolutely.
So it's a good segue into this next grouping of questions, and I'm going to introduce what I'm calling friends and colleagues of Bill to share their connection with Bill along the way in this journey, and also to ask a targeted question. And when I was reading the book, I realized, oh my God, I know all these people in the chapters. Many of them are folks we have the privilege to work with. And it was just crazy how many lives you've touched and how we've all kind of been inside different parts of the story in the movie together. And so with that, each of my colleagues and friends are going to come on. I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and we are going to have each of them share their connection with Bill and then ask a question and continue this dialogue. So first up, I would like to introduce Aishan Padilla with AARP.
Hello, thanks, Paula. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Aishan, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm so thrilled to be able to ask you a question. And you know, I wanted to share, I was just listening to your conversation that during the time that you were with ARP, I really learned a lot from you. And I really think about perseverance, and you were just sharing this quote around that there's no perfect enemies, no permanent opponents, just permanent values and principles. And so I was just reminded of that. Like you know, you still say that, and it's something that's definitely left an impression on me and my leadership style, and just the way that I think about my work in strategic partnerships, because I definitely feel like it's a missing ingredient. And so the concept of frenemies is real, and meeting that common ground. But during the time that you were at the ARP and I had the privilege of working with you, I also got to see firsthand your leadership style in action. And I think about the ability that you demonstrated, not just a commitment to the work and the passion, but that you really would roll up your sleeves, and you roll up your sleeves figuratively and literally in the work because you cared. And I think that meant so much to the staff and the volunteers at all levels. But I also remember you talking to people at all levels. So it wasn't, you know, this hierarchical conversation, that you really dug in deep to listen to staff, to hear what was on their mind and what mattered, particularly folks that were out in the field offices. And lastly, I just think about, you seemed to have fun. You enjoyed your job and you really had fun along the way, and cracked a couple of April Fool's jokes that I still remember that I thought were quite interesting in terms of the response of staff. But as I think about all of that and thinking about your book, it's just made me think about the idea of that you talk about is leading from the middle. And so would love to get your thoughts about what does leading from the middle look like then, and what does that look like now?
You know, Aishan, you are a leader yourself. And so I appreciate you. And we did have some fun at AARP and had some good April Fool's jokes. I almost got fired over one of them, as I recall. I think that leading from the middle is a really important idea. So think about AARP. I used to say that about 100 decisions a day are made that influence the future of this organization. And I'm making about 5 of them. So who's making the other 95 decisions? And the answer is teams. The answer is team leaders. The answer is that teams cascade leadership down through an organization. And teams can have visions too. So you need a leader at the top with a vision. We know that. But a team can have a vision. It can be a fundraising team. It can be a policy team. Teams can have visions. And you don't have to be the head of a team even to lead. And one of the most important things I learned was from Colin Powell, who's somebody I've always admired. And you remember we gave him an award one time. And what Colin Powell says is that, have you ever seen people in the middle who on the organizational chart don't seem to have that much power, but they're respected and they lead and they're followed? And I think that's absolutely right. And that's why we have to say to ourselves, leadership can take place at all levels. And I think that's a really important lesson.
No, I agree. It's interesting. I think sometimes about the quote, and I say this a lot, it's like you have to figure out who has the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, because it's not always the seat of power. But curious, as you think about that, are there things that you've seen that get in the way from that leading in the middle or that individual leadership from happening?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing and the thing that gets in the way is ego. So if you're going to nurture a team, if you're going to build a team, if you're going to have leadership from the middle, you have to be able to have naysayers on your team, people who are going to tell you what's wrong with your ideas. And if you're going to do that, you have to check your ego at the door. We have so much ego, so often exercised, that it really gets in the way of working together and leading an organization.
It's true. There's no I in team. I think that's the quote, right?
That's the quote.
So no, this has been really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aishan. And now I'm going to ask Howard Bike from American Cancer Society, longtime friend and partner, to join the discussion.
Well, for the audience, I've had the honor and privilege of knowing Bill for over 15 years. I first worked for Bill when he was CEO of AARP, and then later at the American Cancer Society, where he served as a member of our board of directors. And I also had the pleasure of lecturing at a few of your classes at Georgetown, which was a real treat. So my question pertains to the concept of doing well by doing good. This theme is prominent throughout your new book. And that said, though, the idea of doing well by doing good has really evolved over the past few decades. In the 90s and early 2000s, there seemed to be a rise in brands aligning themselves with causes, the emergence of corporate social responsibility as a business strategy. Then fast forward to 2019, and there was obviously a big announcement by the Business Roundtable, and it was pretty high profile and lauded by many, but frankly skeptical by many as well, which was the announcement that the purpose of a corporation is to promote an economy that serves all Americans, and that stakeholder value was of equal importance to shareholder value. And then fast forward to this past year, issues such as the pandemic, of course, racial inequality, and economic calamity have now forced companies and their CEOs that previously were neutral to take very public positions on social and political issues because their employees, their consumers, their investors are now demanding it. So you've not only observed these trends over time, but in many ways, you've been a force in driving this change around doing well by doing good. So given that vantage point, so what are your thoughts about this evolution of doing well by doing good, and what do you see for the future?
Well, first I have to tell a Howard bike story. So when we were together at AARP, I called Howard into my office and I said, Howard, I think I have good reasons behind this. I want us to do a partnership with Disney. And Howard looked at me and he said, okay. And at the next big member event, there on our stage was Mickey Mouse. That's Howard and his ability to do partnerships. And it was the same today, Howard, at ACS. So on this issue of doing well by doing good, not every company gets it. You know that, I know that. And it can be hard for some companies to find their sweet spot. But doing well by doing good is a definite trend, and it's heading in the right direction, and it's going to work well for all of us. The idea here is companies serving people, planet, and profit, which is what the Business Roundtable statement was all about. And there are a bunch of reasons for this. Companies, they see that building social and environmental strategies into their core business can improve their financial picture. And it can also help win customers, bring in new employees and hold existing employees, and help the communities in which they serve. So everybody can win if we can get this right. And markets are changing. So I look at my alma mater, Unilever. Half their sales come from low-income and middle-income countries. And they need what's called a license to operate. In other words, they have to be good corporate citizens. Employees want companies to do well by doing good. Consumers want companies to be responsible and care about the community, protect the environment, give back to causes. And there's a piece of research that shows that 9 out of 10 companies with strong reputation have strong purpose scores. And then last, investors are more and more engaged. And probably the most famous of these is Larry Fink with BlackRock. But universities and others are getting involved in divesting themselves of fossil fuel companies. So all this is working towards opportunities that are going to benefit all of us.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Bill, that was great. And now I want to introduce Kimberly Amazine from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, another friend and colleague over the years.
Thanks, Paula. Hi, everybody. How you doing? Hi, Bill. Good to see you.
Hi, Kimberly.
Listen, it's a milestone moment. You're releasing your first book with lots of great perspective. One of those chapters is on the tobacco wars, and I have the privilege and honor of working with you at Tobacco Free Kids. You are our board chair, a longstanding board chair. You were a founder of the Campaign for Tobacco Free Kids 25 years ago. We're celebrating a milestone moment in its history, and you're a big part of that. You are truly responsible for one of the best and biggest public health victories in the United States. We still got a lot of work to do, which is why we've got the theme taking on the toughest fights, which I think resonates with the kind of, reflection that you've done in your book and the kind of fights you've taken on. But when you founded the campaign, you did a couple of things that I think, you lay out beautifully in the book that I want to pull out, for our audience today. We're unpacking those early fights. You talk about them, about the power of partnership, but you also redefined advocacy and the advocacy model and what it meant to pass effective and strong policies, and the role of hard-hitting media and the compelling and unique and vital voices of young people. All of that lends itself to kind of the storytelling nature of who you are and kind of the fabric of you know, your career and your passion. So can you talk a little bit about the power of storytelling with purpose and how it shaped some of the early fights and focus in tobacco control?
Well, Kimberly, you know how proud I am of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and all the good work that's gone on over the years. And storytelling has been part of it. You know, back in the early days, the tobacco industry was an absolute juggernaut. They were giving huge amounts of money to Congress. They had PR agencies, ad agencies, law firms all lined up. I mean, they were powerful. And we tried to attack them in a variety of ways. And one of our more effective ways was telling stories. And so you remember the early advertising that we did, where we showed young kids smoking. And it was jarring. And it really caught attention. It caught attention on the Hill. It attracted public support. Storytelling was important. And you're still doing that today, now with not just tobacco, but with vaping, and not just in the United States, but across the world. And so the thing about storytelling is that it's interesting. And we hear it on NPR and at sales meetings and at conferences and what have you. But oftentimes, I think stories are just interesting. They're not strategic. And we have to think to ourselves about strategic narratives. And that's how I like to think about it. So I want to give two examples. Both of them are from the the Coalition to Transform Advanced Care. So one of them is about a woman named Miss Norma, 90 years old, 5 feet tall. Miss Norma went to her doctor and he told her that she had uterine cancer. And here's what we're going to do to you. And she said, no, you're not going to do any of that to me. I'm 90 years old. I'm hitting the road. And she went all over the country with her son and daughter-in-law and their poodle named Ringo. And she went wherever she wanted to go, to the Grand Canyon, to Okefenokee, to Niagara Falls. And she lasted 9 months and she died a quiet death. And she left a diary where she talked about all the wonderful experiences that she had had. And the other story is about a woman with stage 4 breast cancer. And she did not like her doctor. And she screwed up her courage to go to the hospital and say, I want a new doctor. And they sent this young doctor in to see her, this young physician. And he had her chart in his hand and he said, okay, stage 4 breast cancer, here's what we're going to do. And she got really upset. And in the corner, there was a blue chair. And she said, you see that blue chair? I want you to go sit in it. And I'm going to talk. You are not to talk. You have to listen to me. And she told this doc about her worries. She told him about her families. She told him about what she did for a living. She told him about how much she wanted to live. And at the end of 20 minutes of listening to this woman, what he saw was not a patient, not a stage 4 breast cancer patient, but a real person. So in the case of Miss Norma, she did not want treatment. In the case of the blue chair, Shirley did want treatment. And in both cases, they were what we like to call the authors of their lives. And today at the Coalition to Transform Advanced Care, we have a blue chair in the corner. And if we say to somebody, I want you to listen to me, what we say to them is, go sit in the blue chair. So I think those are powerful stories. And if we can tell stories that are on strategy, we can move mountains.
I love it. It's so memorable and so appreciate being in this fight with you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And now I'd like to introduce Rahul Pasarnakar, who's president and co-founder of CredMade and an incredible leader in social enterprise now. But Rahul, if you can share your connection with Bill.
Absolutely, Bill. So great to see you and can't wait to actually see you in person one of these days on campus. I miss being up on the hilltop. So for the audience, I met Bill in 2009 when I started my own MBA journey at Georgetown University. In fact, we first spoke over the phone when I was deciding whether or not to come to Georgetown at all, because I really wanted to be in a place where I could learn how to use the power of business to make real, sustainable social change at really large scale. I didn't want to just go work for a company like McKinsey or something like that. Bill told me that such a program didn't formally exist yet, but he said, I'd like you to come here and help me build it. So as my fellow panelists know, Bill's honesty and sincerity and directness also make him quite persuasive. So a few months later, I found myself on campus organizing a team of my fellow students to help launch Georgetown's first ever social enterprise initiative, which is now known as Business for Impact. So very, very proud to be affiliated with Bill on launching something that has grown over the years. But Bill, one of the first things we talked about when we got started on forming this thing was Georgetown's unique position at the intersection of sectors: business, government, policy, foreign affairs with our strength in the School of Foreign Service, and of course the extensive network of organizations throughout the DC area. So working across sectors has always been, not just a strength in DC, but one of your personal strengths and core strategies. So now I'm 10 years removed from school. It was something that I really took away in my work with you and the classes I've taken from you. But I'm curious to hear how today's students are thinking about using the business for impact approach, how they see their own roles as business leaders and driving coalitions across sectors. What are some of the core skills or tools that they're learning, and how do they hope to lead real change once they're out of school? I think myself included want to find myself recruiting some of these talented young leaders from Georgetown.
Well, Rahul, at the risk of embarrassing you, I want to tell you how proud I am of what you've done. I remember that phone call very well because I wanted you to come to Georgetown. And we worked together and we did create what is today Business for Impact, you and 4 other students. And we got it through the faculty and we got it up and running. But remember, you did go to McKinsey, and you went to McKinsey because they wanted you and you wanted them. And whether somebody goes to McKinsey or they go to Goldman Sachs or they go to the American Cancer Society, wherever they may go, we want them to understand that there's more than one bottom line. We want them to understand about the triple bottom line. And students today, I think, are a little different, although not that different really from when you were there. They want purpose. They talk about this all the time. I want purpose as well as a paycheck. So one of my students said, I have a lot of student debt. I want to pay it off. I want to have a family. I want to have a good life, but I never want to lose sight of my purpose. That's probably foremost in their minds. They want a decent salary. We all know that. And that hasn't changed very much at all. But by itself, it's not enough. And to quote another student, she said, I need to pay the bills, but purpose is what makes it all worthwhile. They want a healthy work culture. And a lot of people think that that millennials and Gen Z people don't work that hard. The truth is they really work hard, and you've probably seen that in your work. They don't think of work as a place, they think of it as a thing. They say, I will get the work done. And they do, but they say, I want a career, and I'm quoting again, I want a career that's so awesome that it doesn't even feel like working. Now that's a lot to ask, but that's what they want. And that talented people are really expensive and hard to recruit and hard to retain. And organizations realize this. They know that if they're going to succeed, these are the kinds of stars that they need. And so because of that, organizations are getting it, and we're making real progress.
Thank you, Bill. Rahul,
you,
I'm going to ask you to stay on, and I'm going to ask our other friends, colleagues, Howard, Aishan, and Kimberly, can you all come on? And I'd like to do a quick round robin here and just some reflections or just, other headlines, lessons learned, and questions for Bill. And so I'll probably ask each, whoever wants to jump in. I'll start with a quick shout out for you, Bill, and on the heels of Rahul. I remember I was a volunteer for the American Marketing Association with their nonprofit community, and you spoke and somebody stood up and said, that's really easy for you to say, Bill Novelli, head of everything, founder of everything. You're the leader, you've got all the titles, but I work in a big machine that's a dinosaur, and everybody up and around me, it wasn't this dramatic, but pretty much was, I got a lot to deal with because it's not a picture perfect thing here. And like, how can I make a difference when I don't have the control that you have? And you talked a little bit about do your job and your boss's job, because that's kind of what you did. But if you could also speak to the up and coming leadership, that would be great.
Well, this may not sound terribly popular. Aishan and I talk from leading from the middle. And I think that's possible. I also think it's possible to learn from negative leaders and negative managers. We've all gone through that in our lives, and we don't want to waste that time. But at the same time, Paula, I think that life is too short and careers are too short to spend a lot of time working in an organization that really is not going anywhere, that is a dinosaur. And, it's been said, and I think that Gallup has proven this, that that individuals tend to leave supervisors. They don't tend to leave organizations. And so if you have a supervisor whom you don't respect, who's not teaching you, who's not looking out for you, who's not nurturing you, then I think you should seriously think about moving on.
Well said. Okay, the mic is in the middle of the room.
I'll pick up on that theme if that's okay. That's, I think that rings true not only for managers and business leaders coming up in the corporate world, but I'm dealing with it personally today with working with high risk populations, those who have faced barriers to employment, and we're working now in food manufacturing, our social enterprises in the food space, and we've decided that we need to build something on our own because factory supervisors aren't trained to be great leaders, to be empathetic, to build teams kind of underneath, right? It's a, hey, punch in, punch out. If I don't like what I hear, I'm gonna kick you out the door, and that's how factories have functioned for so many years. So we decided, hey, if we're gonna really change the dynamic in the sort of entry level jobs and blue collar jobs, so to speak, we got to change the culture on the ground floor, and that's with our frontline supervisors.
Yeah, Rahul, I think you have one of the hardest jobs that I know. You're really trying to do something.
Does it show?
Well, I don't see any gray in your beard, if that's what you mean. I think that the hardest thing to do is change culture. You know that old saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning? It's definitely true, whether you're at McKinsey or whether you're where you are. It's hard to change culture. And, there's a combination of ways that I think about doing it. One is bring in new blood. One is to try to manufacture some urgency. When people become complacent, you don't see a lot of change. And the definition of a leader is to create positive social change.
I'll ask a question, Paula. This may be a slightly offbeat question. You've spent your career being a social justice warrior, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of tenacity. You reference in your book even your football playing days at Penn. My Aishan, you may be familiar with this. Bill was famous for not taking the elevator, but walking all the flights of stairs to the top floor at AARP National Office. Can you share a little bit about, and this is really relevant also to your days at AARP, whether you're at the early stage of your career, mid-career, or in your third chapter, how do you keep the intensity, the energy, the passion going at the highest level that you've demonstrated over all these years?
Wow, what a question. I like to say about my football days, Howard, that I was small, but I made up for it by being slow. Yeah, when I was young, I used to work out all the time to stay fit, to stay in shape, to play sports. And then I learned a valuable lesson as I got too old for sports. And the lesson I learned was you have to stay in shape for life. You have to stay in shape to compete. And by staying in shape, I don't necessarily mean going out and running marathons. I mean, take the stairs. Do the things that you have to do to stay fit, to basically to enjoy life, to compete, to make a difference.
Thank you.
All right, I want to get in on this action here, Bill. Just thinking about, all of the different causes and, focus and passions that you pursued. For tobacco, at least, because we feel so lucky because you've stayed in it with us. I mean, you are still right there fighting alongside us, providing your sage advice, wise counsel, measured thoughtfulness. I mean, the fights are still big. So what's your why?
Well, I'm not sure exactly. I like things to be fair. And I'm not sure where I got that. I think I got it from my blue collar town, my parents, my family. I like things to be fair. And, the way I see things today, we've got a lot of work to do in this country to make things fair. And, a lot of the kids who smoke, they start off for reasons that have to do with socioeconomic background. And so to me, it's a sense of fairness.
I'm going to ask everybody to stay on this conversation, but I want to interject a question from our friend Jennifer Stark, who asked, what will it take for political giving by companies to catch up with the values, stands, and interests of customers, workers, and a growing segment of investors? That's a great question.
She said political giving?
Yeah. Yes. What will it take for political giving by companies to catch up with the values, stands, and interests of customers, workers, and a growing segment of investors?
Well, political giving is a tricky one. I mean, I think there's too much money in politics today. And I think that really the issue today is what can companies do to give more to important social and environmental causes. And it's not just giving money, it's giving volunteers. It's giving all kinds of skills that they have. Political money is a tricky one. So I prefer to think about companies ramping up. A good example to me, and Howard knows this example, and so does Kimberly, is CVS Health. This is a company that basically started by deciding that it would remove cigarettes from its stores. It cost them $2 billion a year. And in the course of that, they reinvented the company. And so today they are CVS Health. And they've been giving back in many ways, shapes, and forms. So that's the kind of giving that I think we can encourage and that we can benefit from.
Yeah, I think we were all just in the last year, we've been talking about how CEOs and activist companies taking stands and boycotting, other businesses or issues, but seeing them boycott politicians, it was very interesting to see the other trend going in terms of speaking where their values are and more about shaping it, maybe sort of not the traditional way. So,
you're absolutely right. More and more CEOs are standing up and speaking out. Their customers demand it, their employees demand it. And that's a phenomenon that I think will continue.
Yeah. Well, one question that you asked, I think you on every chapter, you're the person that didn't leave too early, but never stayed too long in an organization. I think it's a magical thing in terms of a career. And you always ask yourself, this is my last question, but sort of with all of us in mind here, is that the last chapter you talk about, what do we owe our grandchildren? And everybody's talking about regenerative companies and like how we're going to leave the place better than where we started. And so to borrow that line from you, what's next? Can you talk about what's your call to action to the social capital community and where do we go from here? Well,
the last chapter of the book is what do we owe our grandchildren? And I have to tell you, Paula, I put the book down for about 2 weeks to try to think about that. And what I was thinking about was that all 4 of my grandparents came to this country from somewhere else. And when I was growing up and I was a young adult, I kept saying to myself, what are these immigrant values that they have? And I decided it was a love of country. You know, immigrants love America. In fact, we all love America. The second thing was strength of family. And then a reverence for education and an appetite for hard work. And I thought to myself, how can I impart those values to my grandchildren? Because these kids have so much. But there are plenty of kids in America who don't have very much. And so what can we do to make our country better? The first thing we have to think about in my mind is climate change. This is an existential threat, and we've got to face up to it. And everybody, regardless of which organization you belong to, can make a difference in that regard. And the second thing is we've got to fix the American dream. As I was saying to Kimberly before, you know, things aren't fair. We've got to make things fair. So we all probably have heard of the idea of zip code risk. And the idea there is that your zip code has more to do with your quality of life and how long you'll live than your genetic code. That is not fair. We've got to do something about that. That's what all of us have to do as privileged Americans. And so we can make things better. It's not just our obligation, but it's our legacy. And so for me, that's what's next.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I just want to say, Bill, thank you so much. I really do feel like this book, knowing you, was amazing, but just reading through it, I just have to say the honesty and the depth and the straight shooter, like you talked about who is a good witch and who is a bad witch in here. But you were straight up. And I liked what you said about, like, don't lie, tell the truth, like just be straight up. And I think that is vintage Bill Novelli. And I'm just so excited to continue on and to continue our relationship and to follow what you're doing at Georgetown and stay close with the community. So I am going to say thank you, Bill Novelli, from all of us friends of Bill Novelli, and just close this out. We will have the more from Social Capital Community Insights, and I know we'll hear more from you, Bill. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much.
And thank you all to our friends of Bill.